Hey there, cool cats and kittens. It's Mr. Fleets, Friday, April 17th. Again, this is no school today, so there is really no expectation that I have from you. This is just meant to help those of you out who have already submitted your responses to the Chapter 4 FRQ, or for those of you who have not yet responded to kind of maybe refocus your thinking. Again, I will send this link out through Canvas with some other materials to help you out. Like I said, I'm going to keep it short and sweet today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen with you. And let's see kind of where we go. So here's the prompt for today, or for this week. Many members of the US Congress have been repeatedly elected, and incumbents often face little opposition with no real chance of being replaced. While the 22nd Amendment restricted the president to 2 4-year terms, members of the legislative branch may still be reelected to their office without limit. Develop an argument that takes the position on whether the Constitution should be amended to include term limits for members of the House and Senate. Um, a great piece of advice to you is always review this last sentence. The last sentence is really going to tell you what you are meant to be arguing. Most people were able to kind of wade through that, but you were basically saying, should there be term limits, meaning should members of the House and Senate be limited on how long they can serve, or no, there should not be limits on how long members of Congress can serve. Use at least one piece of evidence from one of the following documents. Your choices are the Constitution, Federalist 10, and Federalist 51. I will say right now that I noticed a few of you that selected to use the Constitution as a piece of evidence really got into trouble here because you said, well, the Constitution says dot dot dot. Never should you use such a broad term as the Constitution. You should be looking at something specific like the powers of Congress as outlined in Article 1. You could use the system of checks and balances established through Articles 1, 2, and 3. You could talk about um, the difficulty in the amendment process and how challenging it is to actually get constitutional amendments in there. I mean, you should not just say the Constitution. You should be referencing a specific clause. You should be referencing a specific amendment or a specific part of an article. Because the test is now open book, I think you should have no problem there. Federalist paper number 10 is your second choice. Okay, Federalist paper number 10, again, we talk about factions, and Federalist 51. Now, some folks, and my apologies for bringing the hammer on a few of you, but when we start talking about Federalist 51, separation of powers and checks and balances are not synonymous. Okay, they are close, but separation of powers talks about the importance of keeping the powers of each branch of the government separate from one another. Checks and balances really refers to those powers that they have to check the power of the other branch, whether it's Congress's ability to pass laws, but the president's ability to veto those laws. You could look at the court's ability to rule a law passed by Congress and the president is unconstitutional. But those are checks and balances one branch has over the other. Separation of powers really does refer to keeping those powers separate. So be really, really careful. A lot of you, I was more strict than I probably needed to be, but please understand what you're talking about when you use those two terms. Again, every one of these questions is going to say, respond to the prompt with a defensible claim or thesis that establishes a line of reasoning. And that's going to be where people will crash and burn. I noticed some people were either I was on the fence and I kind of made notes in your comments on your responses. But if you say, yes, I feel that term limits should be established for Congress, period, and there's no because statement, that doesn't really establish a line of reasoning. I would also go so far as to say people that say, because of Federalist 10 and Federalist 51, there should not be term limits. Just because you're saying the word of a document, that doesn't necessarily establish your line of thinking, what you are going to now be proving in those two follow-up paragraphs. So please, please be aware of that. No, it's not required that you reference a document in your thesis, but you do need to establish a line of reasoning, okay? Because the system of checks and balances outlined in Articles 1, 2, and 3 and the separation of powers mentioned in Federalist 51, there is no harm in having unlimited terms for members of Congress. That would be something that would follow that exactly. You could also say something along the lines of, I believe that there should be term limits established for members of Congress due to the powers of factions identified in Federalist 10 and that, the long-standing incumbency factor. Like you're adding pieces together that say, here's what I'm going to be proving in paragraphs 2 and 3. That being said, I've linked here. It's also linked on Canvas, this 3-paragraph model. Those of you who are still submitting a chunk of text of 5 sentences, that does not make an argumentative essay. And at this juncture, if those are the 2 things you're going to be graded on, I'm going to be a little tougher on you. Take it from me. From here on out, if you turn in 1 paragraph or 6 sentences and say, here's my argumentative essay, I will just look at that as, hey, listen, I'm putting something into Canvas so my parents get off my back. That's not going to get you any points on the AP test. Um, so again, if you're not following a 3-paragraph model, thesis, evidence 1, evidence 2, I don't know what else I can do there. You need to set up, and I'm not saying you have to follow this template, but what else are you doing? Unless you are getting 6 or 7 points automatically without following this, this is a structure that you should follow. Your claim, I believe that there should be term limits because of, longstanding politicians, and become factions. They vote in their own interest. They don't vote in the interest of their constituents. Whatever your line of reasoning is, that first paragraph can be shorter, but you need to make it easy for the reader to understand. Paragraph 2 is evidence 1 in Federalist 10, and connect it back to it. You talk about power factions. In Federalist 51, separation of powers does not go close enough. We need to have checks and balances. You're connecting it back to your theme. Now, I had a question come up with a lot of people on Wednesday and Thursday. Do I need to have a quote? I would say right now, everybody can say, pull a quote that says, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. Everybody in the country knows that quote. Go back through your foundational documents and really make a connection. Get at least 2 pieces of factual evidence from the document that you can pull out, because you're only going to have 25 minutes to write. So when you get that document that you've selected, you need to be able to go and say, oh, Federalist 51, here's 2 things, here's what I'm trying to prove, here's how it ties back. And again, evidence number 2 in the 3rd paragraph. No, it doesn't need to be a second document, though I would be very, very careful about just citing Waples. Okay, I had a few people say, well, the core values of our government, and they just set a core value. That's not really tying it back. You can use an idea, but I think evidence number 2 in paragraph number 3 can be another document. It could be a court case. So if you go back through your court cases and categorize them not by amendment, but by the freedom that they're protecting, whether it's a speech, religion, press case, whether it's due process, the rights of the accused, whether it's a commerce clause case, categorize those cases. So you could, in theory, if you got a civil liberties or a civil rights question in the argument, that you could use a court case. I would say document, court cases, then if you are flailing for another piece of evidence, something that you've pulled from class. But again, you want to be able to be as specific as possible. The more specific you are, the more likely you are to get those points. On this document here, I've also included just reminders back to the 2 pieces of information that we used in Unit 1, which we looked at some notes for Federalist 10, Brutus 1, and Federalist 51. I'm not going to go through these, but I would call your attention back to these documents or back to these notes, because I think this is a really nice way to kind of refresh your memory. So those guided reading questions that we answered, that's a good way to kind of look at what Federalist 10 was trying to talk about. But again, we looked at Federalist 10, the majority rule versus minority rights. Factions, a large republic is better equipped to handle those factions. No one group would become too powerful. I gave you 2 quotes in here. So work smarter, not harder. Go back and pull these things out. Brutus 1 has information there as well for your document analysis, and we compared Fed 10 to Brutus 1. And then Federalist 51, there's 2 versions of these notes on here. Go back through. Okay, what is the thesis? The separation of powers eliminates the chance of one branch taking too much power. But if we dig deeper into Fed 51, separation of powers is not enough, that we would then need to establish on top of that through the Constitution, through the adoption, again, the Federalists wanting the adoption of the Constitution, through those Articles 1, 2, and 3. So please, if you have not gone back through these, go back through this. Okay, there are notes, there are things available there to you. But again, all of this being said, if you're not following a 3-paragraph model, if you're not underlining your thesis and it doesn't establish a line of reasoning, there's not a lot of points that one can win. Okay. So I know that I've given feedback to everyone who submitted up until about 5 o'clock yesterday afternoon. Like you, I'm going to be taking a break this weekend. I'm going to get outside. I'm going to hang out with my son. Uh, Trivia. He broke one of my Nintendo Joy-Con controllers. So thank you, GameStop, for still delivering here under quarantine. And I received my replacement Joy-Cons yesterday. Um, Other fun things, two books that I would recommend to you. The first one I've read before. I'm going to read it again. It's Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five. It's part science fiction, part historical World War II novel. It's excellent. I really enjoy that book. And something that I've decided I might try out, I've actually never seen a Harry Potter movie or read a Harry Potter book, but I have the Order of the Phoenix, and I might give it a go here under our new stay-at-home orders. So if you've made it this far, I'll throw out a few bonus points to anybody who can correctly guess which house the sorting hat has already assigned me to. So if you get that right and you've made it this far, good for you. I give you some bonus points. Hey guys, it's Friday, April 17th. Be safe, hug your families, wash your hands, have a great day. Miss you, Titans.